Here we go. Right. Lovely. Okay. To achieve that foundation of understanding, let's run through some definitions. So what do we actually mean by the term advocacy? Would anybody like to make some suggestions for those that are doing advocacy work at the moment? What's your interpretation of your role? What is it that you feel you are there to do? How would you do? So if you're at a party or something and someone says, "So what's your job? What do you do?" and you say, "Oh, I'm an advocate." How do you describe it to them?
Like, it might be like you put your feedback forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else?
Legal support.
Say again, please.
Any legal support.
Legal support.
I feel, yeah.
Okay. I mean, it goes back to the point that was made about in certainly in France and Germany and I guess further afield, the term advocate is what we use the term solicitor. And in many countries, an advocate is the official title of a lawyer or a solicitor or even a barrister. We just choose in this country to do things slightly differently. In most countries, the term advocate pertains to someone who works within the legal industry and actually is representing their clients. So it can create a degree of confusion. So I can understand how the legal sort of concept would be included within it. Anyone else, any sort of suggestions on how you would describe an advocate?
From my experience, it was quite, it was a way to help the person, the person's voice was heard. So helping with the communication. Maybe on the other direction is also helping the person to understand the other side. It's like being in between, and also maybe sometimes the advocate, I don't know if I'm right, but sometimes I've noticed advocates know the rights in particular field. For example, mental health advocate would know the field, so it would help the person to understand. So if I would, when I was representing the person, the mother whose children were placed at the foster care, so I had to, it was helpful to explain her the system, how it works, what she can, expect, and even prepare her for meetings where we went together. So it was very, very helpful for her to understand. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Let's run through some definitions and it will come through. But actually what was just given there is a really key part of it. So this is the definition that's put forward by the charity that I'm working closely with at the moment, who they deliver what I've referred to before as statutory advocacy services. Now there is a legal responsibility, and we talk a bit about the legislation later on. There is a legal responsibility for local authorities, county councils and local authorities, unitary bodies, to provide advocacy services to ensure that vulnerable people and people who may be facing particular challenges are able to influence and have a say in decisions that are being made about them in terms of their care, in terms of their health provision, in terms of their statutory rights. And the advocacy people are a charity. They're based down in Hastings, but they deliver advocacy services. So they are contracted to deliver these services. Effectively, it's across the whole of the south of England. So from Kent, where I'm based, all the way across to Cornwall, up into Berkshire, Wiltshire. So they cover a very large area, and they were known as SEAP, South East Advocacy Partnership, but they're now known as the Advocacy People. And this is their definition, which is, as you can read, it's to help anybody that needs independent support to speak up and improve people's lives individually and collectively through putting their case to policymakers. Now, this for me contains some really crucial elements as well. It's about supporting people to have a voice. It's about supporting people to achieve improvements in their life, so better quality of life, better access to resources, better opportunities, possibly to bring them back up so that they've got equal access to opportunities to others who can represent themselves more effectively. It's to support communication, understanding, and for people to put their needs and their wants across so that they can achieve some benefits out of that individually. So that, I think, is a really interesting definition from an organisation that's actively supporting hundreds and thousands of people every single day. One of the relative newcomers to the world of advocacy is Mind, the mental health charity and charities. And they've put out on their website a very simple guide to advocacy, targeting people that would probably want to be advocacy service users, just to really give them a bit of an understanding about what they can expect from advocacy. Because again, the vast majority of people working, I think, as we've seen here today, the vast majority of people that are working within the voluntary and community sector have a vague understanding of advocacy, but not a particularly clear one. What makes it even worse for us is that actually the understanding out there in the community, particularly amongst people that can benefit from advocacy, is it's not a concept they've even heard in many cases. So actually trying to get an understanding of how an advocate can support is really tough. So Mind invested in some pretty good resources, and I would suggest all of you do go to Google, put in Mind, and then put in advocacy, and you can access those resources, because it's a really nice way of conveying to people that could benefit from advocacy support. It's a really good way of conveying to them in simple and plain English what that advocacy would look like, whether you're providing it yourself or whether you're providing it, or whether you're signposting them into advocacy support. They're really good resources, so I would recommend looking at those. Their definition is that advocacy means getting support from another person to help you express your views. So again, we've got that communication element in it. Express your views and wishes and help you stand up for your rights. So again, what we see through this is advocacy is about the individual. It's not about a group of people. It's about the individual being able to express, to communicate, to put across what their aspirations are, what their hopes are, what their objectives are, what they need and what they want. And someone who helps you in this way is called your advocate. So whoever is working as an intermediary, helping a person who may not be able to convey themselves what it is that they want or they need, to support them in communicating and expressing what it is that they want. And that's the role of an advocate. An advocate doesn't speak on behalf of that person. They simply help through communication and empowerment activities to ensure that what that person wants to communicate, to ensure that that is communicated and that it is heard by those who are making decisions about that person. Now, an example of that could be someone who has been receiving a medicine regime from their doctor, which the doctor then says, you know what, I don't think this medicine is right for you. I think we need to change it. That person may actually say, well, may feel that actually a change of their medicine, a new prescription or whatever, might not be in their best interest. They might be nervous about that. They might not be able to convey that effectively to their GP. So they should be getting the support of an advocate, so that an advocate can help them convey that information to that GP. Now, that could be done in the form of writing a letter where they say, tell me what you would like to go into this letter. and we can write it together. Or it could be that that independent advocate will go to the GP for a meeting with the GP, and to encourage and support the patient to talk about their concerns or their reservations. It might be to just ensure that the GP is listening. It's really, this for me is about having someone there that can help you communicate and be heard, so that your rights, and whether they're legal or whether they're moral rights, that actually you are able to influence decisions that are being made about you. So that's the role of the advocate, it's facilitating and supporting and helping that communication. It doesn't mean doing the communication all the time, but sometimes it's just helping to ease that communication and making sure that that communication is heard. All right, we've got some chat questions coming up. Let's see what we've got. So supportive role, empowering. So it's the same as positive, active. Yes, absolutely. This is not about disempowering the client, saying it's all right, I'll speak on your behalf. That's not good advocacy. That's poor advocacy, and actually that is as limiting as someone who's not listening on the other side. It is really about facilitating and supporting and empowering that communication. So making sure that they're heard, that they're listened to, and that what they want is influential in decisions that are being made about them. That is what the advocate is there to do. They are not there to guarantee a positive outcome of that communication. They are simply there to ensure that that communication takes place and that the wants and needs of the client are heard and considered. Now, a really successful advocacy intervention could actually mean that the client really doesn't get what they want. That's really hard for the client, but actually from an advocate's perspective, they may walk away going, that was a great piece of advocacy because actually they were listened to. Just because the decision didn't go their way, from an advocacy point of view, I did a great job. From a client's point of view, they'll be sitting there going, well, I didn't get the outcome that I wanted. I'm not happy with this. That advocacy was abysmal. So it's really interesting that the perspectives on what good advocacy should lead to. So yeah, mind really good resources, a very straightforward definition of what advocacy is. So I would recommend going to Google and looking at that. Monique, my mantra is nothing about me without me. The customer is at the center. Give them the voice. Absolutely. You have to make that your number one objective as an advocate. You do not assume that you understand what the client wants you to say. You do not make assumptions. You are empowering them to communicate and for their voice, their wishes, their needs, their objectives, their aspirations to be heard and to be considered. So yeah, absolutely. Right. ENA Care Group, who are a provider of care services, they are absolutely committed to the role of advocacy. They don't see that an advocate is a troublemaker or is creating difficulty. They see the benefits of advocacy so that actually they have a better relationship with their clients, the people that they're providing care to. And their definition, I think, is fantastic because it shows a really positive commitment to customer satisfaction, to achieving positive benefits for the people that they're there to serve. And I think that makes them a really client-centered care provider. So I like this, and actually you see evidence of that commitment in other areas of their work as well. So they proactively work with advocates, and they see the role of an advocate in health and social care being to support a vulnerable or disadvantaged person and ensure that their rights are being upheld in a healthcare context. So again, it's that independent person in the middle who is just ensuring that someone is not receiving or not being disadvantaged in decisions that are being made about them, and just ensuring that their rights are being heard. And it's just really helping these needs be considered by people over here, and just making sure that actually they are taken into account, which in this context is ensuring that appropriate healthcare provision is put in place. And it's really nice to actually see a care provider committing to advocacy as well. There is a national organisation called the Advocacy Project, who I really like. They're really forward-looking. They're very proactive. They're quite creative in the ways that they deliver advocacy. So again, I would suggest looking at some, I mean, particularly for those that are doing advocacy currently, that are advocates or are running advocacy programs, have a look at the Advocacy Project, because they share a lot of what they do. Go to their website, look at their social media feeds, because there's some really, really good stuff in there as well. And that they do a lot of thinking about how to really drive advocacy forward. That, from my experience, that there's quite a lot of how can I describe it? There are people that are very active within the world of advocacy who are known as the shouty bunch, who are very vocal when advocacy is not embraced, and when advocacy is not as effective as it could be. And they just bang the drum and sort of present advocacy as a panacea, as the answer to everything. Well, if you use advocacy, you get all the best outcomes. But, you know, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think what you get with people like the Advocacy Project is saying, we truly believe in advocacy, and what we want to do is champion a wider use of advocacy. But what we also want to do is drive forward advocacy and keep improving it and getting better at it and making it more effective. So they're definitely not part of the shouty bunch. They're part of the, we believe in it, and we think actually more people need to understand it and believe in it. So what a lot of the resources that they've got, a lot of the information that they put out there, that they have a very positive stance about advocacy, and they're not defensive about it, but they're actually real advocates for advocacy. So their definition is that the Advocacy Project helps marginalised communities to speak up, to understand their rights and make choices. Stigma, isolation and inequality are some of the biggest challenges faced by people with learning disabilities, mental health problems, dementia and eating disorders. We are working with people to address these challenges. So the first part of that is slightly confusing. It's almost like, well, they're kind of working with groups rather than working with individuals. But actually the work that they do is on an individual basis. They just happen to recognise that there are certain people facing certain challenges who are not being as actively involved in decisions that are being made about them. They're not as influential in how services are being delivered to them. So they recognise that there are certain groups that are being marginalised, and what they do is they work with those people on an individual basis, providing advocacy support. And then what they do is they do a lot of educational work with providers of services targeting those particular groups, just to get them to embrace the benefits of advocacy, better outcomes for people, more user-led decisions, greater levels of co-production and co-design, and just really recognizing the power of service users, stroke beneficiaries, stroke clients, being influential in decisions that are being made about them individually or collectively. So I think the Advocacy Project is something that I would recommend you do or take a look at. We've got another item here on ENA. I don't know, Corinda, what ENA stands for. I just know them as the ENA Care Group. I can't answer that one.
Sorry, I just Googled it. It's a care home.
Yeah.
It's a care home.
Yeah, they're fab. They're really, I really like their approach to things. I think they do a bit of domiciliary as well. So for me, in terms of reviewing those definitions, I think the key things to take out of it is that it's advocacy is a support service. you are not doing, you're not undertaking the communication on behalf of someone. You're not standing there going, don't worry, I'll speak on your behalf. That's absolutely abysmal advocacy. That's not what you're there to do. You are there as an advocate to facilitate and to empower the second point there, communication. You are there to ensure that someone is able to convey effectively what they want to get across. So the ways in which you can do that is support people with writing a letter, support people with putting an email together, support someone with putting an appeal in, support someone at a tribunal if there's something that's being assessed, if it's a PIP, a benefit related appeal. What you do is you work with them in advance and say, look, this is what will be coming up in this situation. How would you like to address that? What would you like to do? And it really is about just giving that client the appropriate tools for them to be able to convey what they want to convey, and then to ensure that the people that they're talking to pay attention to it. So an advocate really there is support communication and then just ensure that they're heard. But then if information is being relayed back to that client, they don't understand it, you are there to ensure that they do understand so that they can then work out what their response to that would be. So it really is sitting in the middle. You never ever marginalize, you never push the client to one side and say, I'll deal with this because I've got lots of experience of it. That's poor advocacy. It's always about ensuring that that client is actively involved in decisions that are being made about them. They need to be heard and they need their rights to be upheld. So a degree of technical knowledge about, the Care Act, knowledge about the legislation that applies to a particular area of work. They need to understand that just to ensure that there are no breaches of that legislation and that someone is being supported in the appropriate manner. So never speak on behalf of your client. Make sure that they fully understand what's happening to them and they understand the implications of it, and then empower them to find to communicate their response to that so that they can make decisions about what they can influence decisions that are being made about them.
I think Francisco wants to ask a quick question, Jason, if that's all right.
Yeah, please, Francisco.
What I really want to follow up on is, you mentioned empowering and you mentioning on giving the necessary information so that the person will be able to transmit whatever they want. So in one way, let's say you're standing in the gap, you are the bridge.
You are.
So the moment you do that, what keeps reoccurring to me is that I keep seeing the same situation happening over and over again. Is this codependence aptitude that people kind of try to sustain. So even though in small little things that my members have, okay, I see that this chap have a problem, okay, we're gonna try to help him out. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, the same individual end up coming back to me with a kind of lack of, is an apathy that they fall into a place of, that this person gonna be there always. So in one way, I do understand advocacy. You have different measurements that you can create on, but is how can I create a certain independence on the person that I'm actually giving the service to, so in the future they will be able to kind of grow within themselves a certain security.
Yeah,
I know I'm getting into psychology here and a little bit, but I really didn't want to. But this is a thing that keeps reoccurring to me, so I just thought, why not ask the question?
That is the golden question.
That is a really really interesting question, and I would appreciate other people's perspectives on this. I will give my view on this, not as an advocate, not as someone who's delivered advocacy, but as someone who's provided a lot of coaching support Everyone's different. Every coaching client that I've supported or that I've mentored, everyone is different. There are some people who naturally are very self-sufficient, very independent, and want the minimum level of support so that they can go off and do it themselves. And quite often, my role is to kind of rein them back in a bit and say, look, I don't think you're ready to go ahead with this particular action now, because I think we just need to explore it a little bit more. And actually, I'm then in a position where I'm just trying to sort of keep them relying on me a little bit, because I don't think they've done sufficient thinking. At the other end of the scale, there are clients that I've supported on a one-to-one basis where they get to the stage where they are so dependent on me to make any kind of decision that they just get to the stage where, yeah, Jason, I just really need you to tell me what to do. And I point blank refuse. I say, no, you have to make the decision yourself. You have to be the one who makes this decision. So my role as a mentor or as a coach is to help you understand the options that are there for you, and then to go through discussing those options and for you to be able to make a decision about which one is right. So for me, the difference, the role of a coach stroke mentor stroke advocate, which is very different to an advisor position. So this role over here as a coach mentor advocate is to really get to keep the client in the driving seat so that they can reach a position where they can go, I have made that decision myself. And then what you need to do is just keep reminding them that it was them that made the decision, and actually that I'm not giving them the answers. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm not an advisor. You know, one of the big questions is, what's the difference between an IAG service, an information advice and guidance service, or a business advisor, and a coach stroke mentor stroke advocate role? These people will tell you what to do. These people over here, the advocates, mentors, and coaches, will empower you to make that answer. And in theory, by adopting this approach, people will naturally self-select away. They will naturally want to exit, because you are giving them the skills and the confidence and the knowledge that they will then go, actually, I don't need you anymore, because I've developed these skills to self-advocate, to actually work out what's right for me because of how you've supported me. So I would say, really, the short answer to a long response, apologies, if you take an advisory role where you are positioning yourself as the one that's got all the answers and you're just telling them, you will get dependency. You will get people who will just keep coming back saying, well, you told me what to do last time and I need you to tell me what to do this time, and you will create that dependent relationship. If you take an approach where you are empowering someone, helping them find their own answers, you will naturally get that separation occurring. So you'll naturally get people going, I probably can find this out myself because of how we did it last time. So I from my perspective, from my experience, Francisco, that's what I would say is a good way of managing that. Anyone else? Any views?
Can I just share that when working with the vulnerable people, especially with mental health problems, not like, personality disorders, but even like a low level of depression, anxiety, especially what is happening now with the Brexit and other, people are so uncertain and anxious. Quite often, what they expressed within our project, they said that they really appreciated suggestions and guidance, because they said that, when they're going even for counseling, they said just talking from their side, it wasn't enough, it wasn't helpful. They can share with friends, with other people, but what they really needed, it was a guidance and suggestions. Sometimes they do need advice, and it's really helpful because they can, start moving towards somewhere. I know advocate, it's not that role, but I just wanted to point out that some people really, really appreciate getting some direct information because they're really lost and confused.
Yeah. One of the things that the advocacy people do through their their veterans advocacy service is, and this is something that that Monique has put on chat, is that it's helping people to navigate service support that's out there. And actually, that for me is borderline advising. But actually, it's massively appreciated. Telling people where they can go to get additional support, you are giving information, and therefore, by implication, you're advising them to go to that for support. But actually, giving direct advice, saying you should be doing this, that is not advocacy. That fits into the IAG area. And the only time I think we should ever stray into that is if someone has communicated to you something that they are proposing to do that you, from a professional perspective, you know is going to create problems to them. So I would suggest the boundary there is to flag up. I think if you go down this route, you might be running into problems. So let's look at what those problems could be, again, to empower the client to make their own decisions about this. So I would never in that situation say, you mustn't do this, because you are then giving advice. It's very much from experience, this might happen. Shall we have a look at it in a bit more detail so you can explore the implications of what you're looking at doing? But absolutely, signposting people into sources of support, I think, is the right thing. So yeah, advice, it's the kind of thing that sits on the fringes of advocacy, and I would only ever very, 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 very occasionally dip into it if I felt that someone was making a decision which had the potential to damage them, or to you know, put them in a very even more vulnerable position than they're in. Any other reflections on the definitions? Any other sort of key things that you know people have seen as sort of themes that have come out of this? No? Okay. So in principle, we're all in agreement now that the advocacy, the service of advocacy, is about helping and encouraging and doing whatever is needed to ensure that an individual is able to communicate what they want to be communicated to people that are involved in decisions that are being made about them, to ensure that their legal rights, what their needs, their wants, are being heard and are being considered when decisions are being made that will influence them. And the reason for that, the driver behind all of that, is to achieve positive benefits for those clients, to ensure that actually this communication is taking place and that they're being listened to, they're being heard, and they are influencing, because it will achieve benefits for them, or will avoid a worsening situation for them. So it's just ensuring that their rights are upheld, that they're being heard, that they're being influential in decisions that are being made about them. Okay? Right. I'm going to suggest that we just have a quick 10-minute break and we reconvene at 11:30. Then we've got 90 minutes left to run through the rest of this. I would like you, while you're going and making your coffee, having a comfort break, whatever, just to reflect on these definitions and to think a little bit about where some of the boundaries for advocacy would be, some of the challenges that you might find when you've got someone who is vulnerable, who can't communicate effectively, or you know, put their point across as well as they would like. What some of the boundaries would be, and how what your behavior would need to be in that situation. So if you were there and you knew someone wasn't being listened to or couldn't get their point across, what are the kind of things, what are the behaviors you would adopt in order to empower them to be heard and to influence things that are decisions that are being made about them? So I'd like you to do that over the 10 minutes while we're breaking. I'm going to be crazily trying to find out who the statutory advocacy providers are for for your area, and then I can make sure that you are connected into those, because they are key services. You know, they are professionals who can deliver really good quality advocacy, but they need to be getting referrals from you guys. So if we can come back in, well, I've now got 11:24, so let's make it 11:35. We'll be back here. I'll be starting dead on 11:35, so we'll try and be back for then. Okay? Thanks very much.
Jason, it's Anna. While we're waiting, can I ask you something?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I only once attended the court proceedings, and the mother was had mental health, learning disability, and many have mental health problems. And what I've learned, that what would be helpful for many parents at the court, was this professional advocate that attends court. And sometimes I've noticed how important it would be for people with mental health problems when they have cases, and especially at family court or victims of domestic violence, how important, because they, I could see she couldn't understand. It wasn't only, it was so complex because of the language barrier, and interpreters, they also provide different qualities, and sometimes they just, what they translated, it wasn't exactly what was said. Like, it was so challenging. So I wonder if there is like any specific role or organization that that would provide advocates that particularly deal with children's services and family court.
There is the presiding judge has the authority to halt court proceedings if they feel that the person who is the subject of the proceedings, if they are not understanding what's going on and they're not able to properly engage with what's happening, they can appoint what's called a paid representative.
Mm-hmm.
And the court pays for that paid representative.
Okay.
So that there are organisations that do have trained paid representatives, and the court pays for them to come in to do that work. And I think the court pays something like £40 an hour to that organisation for someone to come in and to do that role that you are describing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it can be because of language related issues. It can be because of mental capacity. It can be a range of different reasons why someone just isn't understanding what's happening around them. But it is for the judge to trigger the use of a paid representative who can do this advocacy work on behalf of the client.
Can it be suggested by the client solicitor?
Yes. Yeah. If the solicitor feels that actually this is needed, and the big problem is that quite often the solicitor takes on the role of the advocate, but actually takes on that role as an advisor, because to a degree, as a solicitor, they are giving advice and telling. So there is a little part of what an advocate does that is is advocacy, pure advocacy work, but they also do stray into that advisory role as well. So the relationship between the paid representative, who is a pure advocate, and the solicitor, who, as I say, sort of straddles the line between the two, can sometimes be quite a difficult relationship. Because the solicitor is like, well, we're being paid to do this. We don't need a third party to do it. But actually, what they forget sometimes is that they are not always acting in the client's best interest, even though they tend to, just because of how they work.
Yes, I was sitting in the back, and I could, at one point, the solicitor was asking such complex, long sentences, like question.
Yeah.
So that the judge had to make it simple for the client I was with to understand what the question, and she had a learning disabilities, and she didn't speak English at all. Yeah. So I was like blown away by the way. So I think the advocate in a court would be perfect. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to take time. I don't want to take more time.
No. It's a really important one. If things do go to court proceedings, the judge just does have the power. If they feel that the client is not fully understanding what's happening, and that they are not getting appropriate support from their legal representative, a solicitor or barrister or whoever, they can say, we halt these proceedings until we have a paid representative who is an advocate to come in and to provide that level of advocacy support to the client because they need it. That's down to the judge to make that decision. And I think 6 months ago, there was a bit of a landmark court case where a judge did say, no, we're stopping here. We are stopping. We are going to get a paid representative to come in and to do what we need them to do because this client is not understanding what's happening and is being asked to make decisions that they don't have sufficient understanding to be able to make those decisions.
Thank you.
So yeah, no, it is an important one. Right, just going to check to see. It looks like most people are back. Okay, fantastic. Right. Okay. So nationally, there is, and part of advocacy professional training, there is a framework called the Principles of Advocacy that should be applied to all kinds of advocacy work. So whatever the support needs of the client are, there are certain principles, this principle framework that should be applied for it to fully count as advocacy work and rather, not being information, advice and guidance or mentoring or whatever. These behaviors are crucial and need to be demonstrated in order for it to count as advocacy, an advocacy service. So let's run through them. So, and the reason for putting these in place is if you are supporting a client and you want to do it using advocacy, these are the behaviours that you need to adopt. So we'll run through them and then we'll talk a bit more about what advocacy looks like in detail. So the first thing is there needs to be absolute clarity of purpose. There needs to be absolute understanding of why advocacy is taking place and clear understanding of where the boundaries lie with how the advocacy will take place. So that the advocacy providers ensure that the individuals they advocate for, the referrers, health and social care services and funding agencies all receive information that helps them understand the advocacy service and the role of the advocate, including its benefits and boundaries. So what that means in English is that everybody who is involved in a case, a complaint, an issue, any kind of hearing are made clear, but understand from the advocate what the advocate is there to do, so that every single one of those parties knows why the advocate is there. This has to be communicated very, very, very early on so that there's no misunderstanding of what that advocate is going to do. Because I think as we've explored before, there could be, a misunderstanding that the advocate is there to give advice. There's could be a misunderstanding there that, well, they're a legal representative. This client is paying for someone from a legal background to come and speak on their behalf. An advocate must, from the very beginning of their relationship with the person, the relationship with the organisation that has referred that person to them, there must be absolute clarity of understanding and clarity of what the advocate is allowed to do and what they are there to do. So that is crucial from the word go. You have to make clear, particularly to the client, the person who is at the centre of all of this, what you can and can't do. Sometimes when the pressure is on, or there is a need to react very quickly, or there's massive amounts of complexity around a client, the temptation may be there to just shortcut and say, look, I've seen one of these before. This is what we need to do. That must be avoided at all costs, because the boundaries of advocacy have to be respected. You have to be very clear. My role in this is, and everybody involved around that client, and the client themselves most importantly, must understand the nature of the relationship they will have with that advocate. So that's number one. Be really, really clear what you are there to do, what you can and what you can't do. So would anyone like to suggest some of the things that an advocate can't do? We've discussed some of them, but would anyone like to sort of suggest an idea of what an advocate shouldn't be doing, what they need to communicate to a client that they can't do?
Their own personal view.
Hello?
Hi, sorry. Express their own personal view.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Give their opinion. Don't give your opinion. Your opinion doesn't matter. It's the opinion of the client, the person you're there to support. That's what matters. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
You can't be persuasive or coercive.
Absolutely. You can't kind of bully the person into doing something. You can ask them questions about, is this what you want? Are you happy with this? You can ask them to explore how they feel about a decision or a comment or a piece of information that you can ask them how they feel about that. But actually saying, you should be angry about that because that's not what you want. That is coercive. That is persuading someone. That's leading and guiding someone. So in terms of clarity of purpose, that advocate has got to be there to help the person understand from a factual perspective. Do you understand what this means? Yes. Right. Do you understand how you feel about that? Do you understand what your reaction is? And it really is about getting absolute clarity, particularly from the client, but also to understand, what the advocate is there to do, and their role within this advocacy case. Sorry, just something's come up on chat. Alice, do not jump into offers so much without consent from the client. Yeah, that's true. You absolutely need the client on board. So just being very clear what you can offer, you need them to agree to utilising your services as an advocate. So yeah, that's really important. Don't go flying into, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that. The client has to be in the driving seat with this, and you have to really work to their agenda and work to what they want to focus on. Sometimes that does, need a bit of clarity or clarifying, well, I'm not actually allowed to do that. As an advocate, I can't do that. But yeah, you absolutely have to respect what the client wants. And as Penny has pointed out in chat, there are times when you may feel that a client isn't being heard, their feelings are not being considered, their wants are not being considered, the process is going against them. A client may very well turn around and say, actually, I've had enough of this. I don't want to do it anymore. It's too upsetting. I'm not happy with it. I don't think I'm going to get what I want from it. They are making the decision. You are simply there to serve them and to help them achieve decisions that relate to their care or whatever the case relates to. Monique has also put, don't overpromise and underdeliver. Yeah, that's a bit of a gripe of mine. A lot of that happens. Well, we can do this. You will achieve this. We can help you, stay in your home. We can help you keep the medication that you're currently on. Do not promise the outcomes. Promise only what you can offer and be clear about that at the very beginning. This is how I can support you. These are the boundaries. I can't go beyond that. And I cannot promise you what the outcome of this is going to be. I can't promise you that you are going to get what you want. If a local authority wants to move someone out of a particular care home into another one because they think it's better suited to them, or if they feel that someone is being sectioned you know, and they may not want it. The advocate cannot promise that they can get the decision overturned. What they can promise is what they're able to do. So thank you for that, everybody. That was useful. So that's the first principle. The first principle is just clarity of purpose. Be really clear what you can do and where the boundaries finish. And to Debbie, problem. Problem. If a client won't admit to being suicidal and you want to tell the professionals for person's safety. Yeah, that dips into one of the later principles, which is around safeguarding. You need to you must adopt safeguarding principles. So if you feel that someone is a risk to themselves, you need to balance between respecting their personal requests, but with also the well-being and the safety of the client as well, which can create really difficult situations if you do feel that someone is a suicide risk, if there are safeguarding issues relating to them as well. And that's down to individual advocates. I've seen a lot of variety in how people approach with that. Some people simply say, if I think someone's about to end their life, then I would be tempted to, in some way, communicate that to professionals. In other ways, other advocates would actually say, I have to adhere to the wishes of the client. And there's lots of discussion about that. So that's a tough one. Alice has made the point, remember that the customer and the client is king at all times. It's all about them and not the advocate. Absolutely. The advocate is there to facilitate, to support, and to empower. It has to be driven by the wants, the needs, and the objectives and the rights of the client. That always has to be at the center of the advocacy that's being delivered. Okay, next slide. Independence. You have to be, and I believe this came up earlier with, yeah, Monique, you raised the challenges of this one. An advocate must be independent, and the information we got here within the principal framework is the advocacy provider is independent from statutory organisations and all other service delivery and is free from conflict of interest both in design and operation of advocacy services. The advocacy provider's culture supports advocates to promote their independence with individuals, professionals and other stakeholders. Advocates will be free from influence and conflict of interest so that they can represent the person for whom they advocate. This is an ongoing challenge with providers of statutory, so local authority commissioned advocacy services, because sometimes the needs of that paymaster, that local authority, or that health body, or that social care provider who commissioned these services, the advocate may be highlighting issues or faults within that commissioning body. So it could be that they're pointing the finger and saying, look, through the advocacy work that we're doing, there is an issue here with this health provider who are actually funding us to do this advocacy. I do know of advocates who have had pressure from their commissioners to, yeah, you're being a bit over thorough with some of this, and we feel that you're flagging up too many issues around this particular subject. That does create a bit of conflict, and in the real world, advocates attempt as much as they possibly can to work independently of whoever is funding them, but that dynamic exists, and it's down really to whoever is managing that contract to ensure that people that are doing advocacy on the ground are buffered and protected from some of these conflicts that might come from a commissioner. So if we're talking about a local authority, adult health and social care, who are commissioning an IMCA, a Care Act advocacy service, it's down to the structure within that advocacy organisation to ensure that people that are working on the front line do not really have to deal with any conflicts that may come up. And they do that in a variety of different ways, that there is appropriate supervision when people are talking about specific cases. And it really just keeps the advocates who are working on the front line just distant enough from those politics that they're not influenced by it as much. Now, in Monique's situation, which is an interesting one, she works for a housing provider and is there as an intermediary and independent, protecting the rights and the wants and the needs of tenants, but is sometimes, and I guess sometimes, Monique, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, will be talking to her colleagues who may even be in the same team as her, or certainly in the same directorate as her, trying to ensure that tenant's rights are heard, when actually what the tenant needs and what the organisation needs and wants are very different, and she's kind of potentially being pulled in that direction to do what's right for the organisation. But if she's truly sticking to advocacy principles, she should be really ensuring that the rights of and the wants and the needs of the client are being heard. So that creates a degree of conflict and tension there. And it would be interesting, Monique, to know how you do navigate that. Because I can't see that being an easy one. And I think there may be times when the nature of the issue that's being addressed can sometimes get you sort of fluctuating a little bit on that sort of independence scale. I'm sorry to pick on you, but you've got quite a unique position there, and it's interesting to sort of think about how that would work. So the advocate is independent. The advocate should, as much as possible, not be funded, not be driven by where the funding for their role comes from. They are there, they are paid to deliver an independent service that ensures that the client is getting the attention and the support that they require to be active and proactive in their case or in their claim or in the situation that they're getting advocacy support with. So Monique has said, I often have difficult talks with colleagues and remind them that we are there for the well-being of the tenant. It's a good one. It's a good one. That's definitely a good approach, is just to ensure and saying, look, I'm here. I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm here on behalf of the client, and actually, you know, we all are interested in doing the right thing for the client, and sometimes our organisational needs have to be secondary to what's right for the client. So independence, that independent role is massively important. You are there for the client, and you do that in an as independent a way as you possibly can. The third principle of advocacy is that the discussions and the support that you do is undertaken confidentially. So information held by the Advocacy Service about individuals will be kept confidential to the Advocacy Service. The Advocacy Service will have a confidentiality policy that reflects current legislation. So GDPR, sorry, the most dreaded four letters in the English language. There has to be compliance with GDPR. You need to get permission from the client for personal information to be stored. It has to be stored in a GDPR compliant way. And you need to just communicate with them why you're collecting the information about them that you are, how your notes are being used. It will be clear about how personal information held by the advocacy provider will be kept confidential, under what circumstances it may be shared, the organisation's approach to confidentiality in the delivery of non-instructed advocacy, and how the organisation responds if confidentiality is breached. So it's effectively, you need robust data management, data protection processes in place. You are working with vulnerable people. These are people that need your support to be able to effectively engage in decisions that are being made about them. And you know, that data is even more it's even more important that their information is being treated confidentially and that is not being spread far and wide. So that for me is a really important element. So I would suggest for all of you that if you are, you're working with clients, you do just have a bit of a think about, GDPR and if you're doing the right thing with them. We at the Advocacy People, we do a lot around case studies, but they're all anonymized. We never, ever flag up a client's name. We never talk about, we never use any information without their permission, and we never use any information that can be where we can identify an individual. We have a lot of people that get very good outcomes because of the advocacy that they get. There's been a lot of work within the veterans advocacy where people have been able to claim back claim benefits, and they've walked away with sort of 30, 40, 50,000 pounds of unclaimed benefits. They're really keen to tell their story, but we respect the confidentiality, and we say, we really like that you want to share your story, but we really adhere to this principle because we believe in them. So yeah, don't share client detail far and wide. For number 4, this is crucial. I think someone made the point that the client is in the driving seat. The number 1 priority of the advocate is to ensure that the person is actively included in the process. So the advocacy provider and advocates will put the people they advocate for first, ensuring that they are directed by their wishes and interests, ensuring that the advocate is directed by their wishes and interests. Sometimes you have to work really hard to get a client to work out what it is that they actually want, what they want as an outcome from a health complaint, for example. If someone's not got the support that they wanted in a particular situation, well, what would you like to happen through this particular situation? What is it? What outcome would you like us to achieve? Never, ever assume. Always ask the question, where is this advocacy working towards? What would the outcome be? What change of circumstances or change of process, or what are we trying to do with all of this? And again, having that absolute clarity of what this is about, you can then ensure that the client is leading this process and the advocate is there simply walking alongside them and helping them, providing the appropriate support at the times when the client needs to make a decision or needs to be involved in decisions that are being made. Advocates will be non-judgmental and respectful of people's needs, views, culture, and experience. The relationship between an advocate and a client is not always an easy one. It's very easy to slip into the kind of two friends together relationship, and actually that probably needs to be avoided. There needs to be trust and respect, but actually with that comes a communication of boundaries. Advocates are not friends. They are there doing a role, and again, this is why the clarity of purpose is really important up front, so that actually the client doesn't suddenly think of that advocate as a friend. They are there to work independently on behalf of the client. When this whole process, this advocacy finishes, they walk away. So that reliance that Francisco spoke about, that kind of culture of dependency doesn't happen. But nonetheless, the person is in the lead, and you need to be respectful of their wants, their wishes, and some of their quirks and challenges, and you need to flex and adapt around that as an advocate. Empowerment, well, this is what it's all about, really. The advocate has got to support people to self-advocate. Now, what we actually mean by self-advocacy, self-advocating, it's providing the support so that the client can be as actively involved as they possibly can be. You are not speaking on their behalf, that they are involved to the maximum, given their challenges, their constraints, the unique set of circumstances that they've got. So, for example, if someone feels uncomfortable about standing up and speaking in a tribunal or something like that, the advocate may wish to help them write a statement that then potentially the client could read out themselves, or potentially the advocate could read out on their behalf. But actually, you're trying to get that client as involved as much as you possibly can in playing their own part within the case. So that could be providing some encouragement. It could be saying to someone, actually, you know what, I think you could do this. I don't think you need me to speak on your behalf. I think probably you could do this. So it's about that encouragement. It's not just providing the practical support. There is that emotional enabling element to it as well. Sometimes it is providing a piece of information. It's not giving advice. It's sometimes giving factual information to someone so that they can then process it. It might mean that they don't quite understand something. So an advocate might then just need to explain it. The client then goes, oh, I get it. I didn't understand the language. All right, okay. And they can be much, much more actively involved. One of the advocates that I've spoken to in preparation of this is they've said it's very easy for an advocate to adopt I know more than you, and therefore underestimating the potential for that client to engage in the process. It's sometimes because they may be a vulnerable person or they've got some challenges or some issues to overcome, it could be very easy to make assumptions about someone's capacity to represent themselves and to put their point across. You should always be optimistic about a client's ability to get involved. That's the advice that I've been given in this is empowerment should be at the heart of it. Always believe that the client can do more than they think they can do themselves. So the final sentence there, where people lack capacity to influence the service, the advocacy provider will ensure the advocacy remains person-led, enable those with an interest in the welfare of the person to be involved. So actually, it really is just, despite your assumptions that someone can't be leading this, the client can't be leading this, there is still a role that the client or a carer or someone who's involved in supporting that client, they should be involved in it. Never ever go, I'm the advocate, I'll speak on your behalf. There's got to be that empowerment, and that's got to be underpinned by a belief that the client could and should and must be more actively involved than they maybe think they can themselves. Got a question. Two questions, two comments. Let's have a look. So Penny, when advocate accompanies client to a hearing or appointment, their presence as a witness is important to ensure fair hearing. Yeah, absolutely. That's an important element of this. You're right, it's difficult to empower clients with language barriers. Many rely on our English, e.g. to write letters or represent over the phone. I've had someone be rude to a client for his lack of English. He felt so bad. Language is a really tough one. The advocacy people use, whenever they have a contract in a local authority area to deliver advocacy services, they always use language support. They always, if they feel that language is a significant barrier, they will always pull in someone to provide that language support, so that there are 3 links in the chain. If the advocate has communication barriers with the client, they will put that link in, which is providing language support as well. So and they pay for that out of their contract. They put that provision in. And it just makes the advocacy more effective, because it breaks down barriers that way. Hussein, you've got what is empowerment and advocacy? Empowerment is effectively giving the client, the person who's at the center of this, the ability to play an active role, a more active role in the case. So the case could be something relating to housing. It could be something relating to care that they're receiving. It could be relating to benefit. You know, there's a decision about someone's benefits, whether there's a sanction or whether it's being withdrawn or changed or something. Whatever the case is that's affecting that client, an advocate, the individual person that is helping that client to be heard and to be influential, they should be encouraging that client to be as actively involved in it as possible, and not just saying, I'll do this on your behalf because I know best. They need to really get that client involved, and that's empowerment. That's the empowerment piece. That's getting that client to have ownership and to play a key role in that case, whatever that case may be. Have we got someone wanting to ask a question? No?
It was Francisco asking about if it's going to be on YouTube. This is yes, and he's also said,
Fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there a question on the chat that I've missed, Toby?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah, please do.
So if I take a scenario, say the advocate is accompanying the client to a meeting, and the meeting isn't going according to the wishes of the client, do you have any techniques or protocols to manage the live situation for the best interests of the client?
I would be tempted again to turn to the client. The client is in the lead in all of this, and I would simply ask them the question: are you happy that you are being heard? Are you happy that just to caveat all of this, this is coming from someone who isn't an advocate. I am not a trained advocate. I simply have worked within an advocacy charity, and I've worked alongside advocates, and I've interviewed advocates. I've done some advocacy evaluation, so I'm not a trained advocate. But I would, in that situation, just say, can I have a couple of moments to talk to my client, and then ask them the question: are you happy that you're being listened to, and that the points you want to get across are being? And if they come back and say, well, no, not really, then that needs to be communicated and flagged up, and that needs to be acknowledged by whoever is sort of leading the meeting. And one of the options, that the client may be asked about is, well, would you like to postpone this meeting and we look at starting again? Whoever's leading the meeting might turn around and say, well, no, we've got to have a resolution now. And at that point, again, you are there as the intermediary. You feed that back. You get the understanding from the client. Look, this is what they've said. We have to try and find a resolution. Say, these are the options for us. And again, it's just that intermediary role. It's just, again, back to the client. Make sure they understand what's happening, what the implications are. Work with them to help them find the solution that's right for them. So yeah, sometimes it would be a case of just almost calling a halt to a meeting and say, I've checked with the client. They don't feel that they're engaged in this. They don't feel that they're being understood. Would it be possible to, the client has requested that we postpone and we come back at a later date, so that we can prepare further. That would be one thing that I think would be reasonable in that situation. If anybody has any other suggestions for that, I'd be more than happy for them to share them.
Thank you.
For what it's worth, I believe that I understand, I completely agree with you with regards to postponing the meeting, but practically speaking, sometimes it might be not really viable to do so. So what I do instead is, obviously, bearing in mind that with my clients, there's usually the language barrier. So I just relay to my best abilities, I relay the concerns that my clients have there and then and try to resolve them. But yes, this is obviously assuming that you cannot postpone the meeting.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Lally has put a question in, well, a comment in. sometimes it's harder to speak to a client if someone who is coming in with them is talking on their behalf. That's a really, really, really good point, and a really big issue is that, particularly with someone who is in a caring role, a full-time carer for someone, or someone who's just concerned about the well-being of someone, comes along to a meeting and keeps speaking on their behalf. The advocate must address the client directly and try and get information from the client, and managing the relationship diplomatically. Yes, I agree. You don't want to upset the second person who's doing a lot of the speaking, because it can create some issues. But there again, you really need to hear from the client. And sometimes, you know, if they are in a position where they're just, someone is speaking on their behalf, you just need to ascertain that, you know, that person is saying things that the client really agrees with. So I think a good technique is just, if someone says something, to then turn to the client and say, is that right? Do you think that's right? Do you feel that way? And trying to get some indication of whether that is the case. They have, again, empowerment. They have to be empowered to play as big a role as they can in the case. So I think something like that is really good. When you have a language barrier involved, an added layer of confusion, that's really hard as well, because it might be that English is your first language. You may not speak the language of the client. It may be difficult to do that, where it might be that the person who's speaking on their behalf is providing that translation service. So it's difficult. You might, in that situation, want to say, well, look, would additional language support be useful, because then we could talk more comfortably together. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard doing that diplomatic system. So yeah, it's not an easy one, that. I haven't got a ready answer to it, but I think if language allowing, if you can, you know, turn to the client as much as possible and say, is that right? You know, you can get some kind of input from them in that situation.
Thank you.
Okay, equality and diversity. One of the things that the advocacy people do really well is they have an EDI policy. They have a working group that's looking at equality and diversity across the organisation, and they will also proactively recruit advocates to reflect the diversity of the people that they're going to be supporting. So there are people with lived experience who they take on as advocates, and they put through an intensive training program. Virtually everybody who is an advocate has some experience in a caring role. There are specialist advocates. One of the things that they do is that they've got an advocate who, they've got a blind advocate, they've got a deaf advocate. So actually, if they're supporting clients who are deaf or blind or have other disabilities, they've got someone within the team that can offer them that support as well. So having advocates within your team that are within an equality and diversity framework will actually improve the relationship with the clients, because you can assign someone to work with that client who has a better understanding of some of the issues, can build a rapport and build trust more effectively, and produce better outcomes for that advocacy. Not necessarily better results as a result, but actually advocacy can be delivered better by having some variety and some commitment to quality and diversity. And that means things like, you know, access. You know, there are advocates that will meet a client in their own home. There are advocates that will meet a client in a community setting. You know, it's not just come to our shiny offices and you can see your advocate there. Outreach, delivering on an outreach basis is a big part of quality and diversity as well. So the advocates, you know, really, the advocacy people really do flex to try and ensure that they engage and they empower and they offer support as effectively as they can. Well, I've spoken about accessibility under EDI, making the service accessible, and one of the really important sort of things that I think accessibility applies to is just an understanding of what advocacy is. really getting out there and proactively educating people about, look, this is what advocacy is and this is why it's important. And, you know, let's keep it as simple as we possibly can so that people can access advocacy. And it's one of the gripes that I have with people that are commissioned to deliver statutory advocacy services. They need to be proactively promoting it, and they're not. Some people are not doing that as effectively as they could do. So advocacy should be available to anybody who feels that they need it, I believe, but certainly for statutory advocacy. Another principle is accountability. Anybody delivering advocacy needs to take notes. They need to keep a record of what is being spoken about. They need to be able to go back and review a case and say, well, this is what was discussed. This is why we discussed it. This is, you know, this is why we took a particular route with this advocacy. So don't just talk to clients and support them. Keep a record, you know, be accountable. Say, well, this is what we did. This is what we discussed. This is when we spoke about it. These were the options that were discussed and these were the decisions that were made. Keep records, because this is your way of proving and being accountable for the advocacy work that you do. One of the other things that is worth considering as well is looking at the under accountability, is looking at the impact of the advocacy as well. Just what difference has this made? You know, someone accessing the support of an advocate, what difference has it made to their circumstances? If we go all the way back to the definitions, one of them spoke about delivering benefits or improving quality of life for clients. If we don't ask the question about what difference has this made to you, we don't know if it has improved quality of life or if it has avoided a worsening of quality of life. So this is, for me, is accountability. It's just keep a record of the nature of the advocacy support, but also keep a record of the difference it's made. How has it changed someone's circumstances? That way you can be accountable and you can reflect on the difference that providing advocacy support has made. Safeguarding is really important. You are working with vulnerable people. You are working with people who may be in particularly vulnerable situations. We spoke about the, you know, suicide risk being one of those. There may be people who are particularly vulnerable to antisocial behaviour, to trafficking, to a range of other issues. So at the forefront of their mind, advocates must be thinking about safeguarding and protecting, you know, the human rights and the safety of the people that they're working with, because they, by their very nature, they will be working with vulnerable people who, for whatever reason, are not able to effectively represent themselves in certain situations. So there will be issues around potential abuse, neglect, health-related challenges as well. So safeguarding has to be, every advocate needs safeguarding training, and that needs to be refreshed regularly. So if you are advocating, if you're working as an advocate and you haven't had safeguarding training recently, go back to your employer, demand that you do some safeguarding training. Again, within the charter and within the principles of advocacy, good quality advocacy, advocates need to be supported. They need to be trained. There needs to be some investment in continuous professional development. They need to be part of peer networks, so they need to be connecting with others. They need to be supported, because actually, if you are working in difficult cases, if you're working particularly, I mean, with the guys that are supporting people that are being trafficked, and you know, if you're working with clients who are you know, victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence, it can be really traumatic acting as an advocate, sitting in the middle and hearing some of the things that people are going through. So actually, there needs to be appropriate support in place for the advocates. An advocate needs to have someone who is there as a supervisor, who has got some ability to support those advocates, to ensure that they are able to share concerns, reservations, to ask questions, to be given guidance. But then there is that investment in their continuous development, and that they do have appropriate skills to be able to get better at what they're doing. So on that theme, some of the research that I did during the break, and I should have put this into the presentation, sorry that I didn't. There is a website that I would suggest you go to, and it sounds a bit odd, but it's called, it's www.blackbeltadvocacy, all one word, blackbeltadvocacy.com. Now, this is a training agency run by a very, very, very experienced advocate called Kate Mercer. She runs the annual UK Advocacy Conference. It's just happened, so unfortunately you've missed this year. It was an online conference. She provides advocacy qualifications. She does all sorts of continuous professional development training around advocacy as well. And that's probably your first place that you need to go to if you want some additional advocacy training. I would suggest going to her website in the first place. She runs it on her own, but there's a lot of information that you can get from her. There are online resources you can access. So if you want to get better at advocacy and you want to, you know, potentially even get an advocacy qualification, go to blackbeltadvocacy.com and look at what's on that website, because there's a lot of really useful information in that. Okay, I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because a lot of this we've sort of, it's been embedded in earlier parts of this, and I'm aware that we need to talk about representation as well. These are the different types of advocacy that are out there. So the first heading is statutory advocacy. Local authorities have a legal responsibility to deliver what's known as statutory advocacy services. And these include, brilliant, okay, thank you Hussein for putting that link out to everyone, that's great. So statutory advocacy, local authorities have a statutory obligation to either deliver these themselves or to commission, to pay for someone to deliver these services on their behalf. And then it's IMHA, mental health advocacy. This is for people who are, their ability to make decisions and to influence decisions about themselves and to represent their needs is limited by their mental health. So this could be someone who is in sorry, mine's going blank, a mental health facility. So it could be a secure unit, mental health unit, who maybe because of a mental illness is unable to actively, they don't have the capacity they don't have the mental health ability to communicate what it is that they would like, or to understand things that are being, decisions that are being made about them and their care and their safety. So there's a responsibility for an advocate to be available to anybody who wants help or needs help with that. The second one is IMCA, which is mental capacity. So someone maybe has a learning disability and is unable to understand decisions that are being made about them. So an advocate then would be appointed to help them understand what's happening with them. There was a television program a few years ago about when Fred West, the serial killer, was arrested, and I think it's called Appropriate Adult. An appropriate adult was appointed to work with him as an advocate because I think his mental age was I'm guessing at the number, but he for a 40+ age man, his mental age was something like a 16-year-old or something like that. Apologies if I've got the numbers wrong. So because of his mental capacity, he was not able to understand the police proceedings that were happening when he was arrested and what he was being asked. So an appropriate adult was appointed, as was his right, who could be there to help him understand what was going on and to help him to be fully engaged with the process of being interviewed and the court process. And that was because his mental capacity was being limited. You then have, under the Care Act and under the Social Care Act, you have the right for everybody who is receiving care to have access to an advocate. So a lot of statutory advocacy contracts, they will receive referrals from social workers, from occupational therapists, from people that are working within care and within social care, just to ensure that people are getting access to the advocacy support that is written into this legislation. So that top section, statutory advocacy, is basically, it's a legal responsibility for local authorities to pay for those services to be delivered. Now, again, back to the research that I did, there is an organisation who delivers statutory advocacy across the UK, who are called Power. Now that's spelt P-O-H-W-E-R, and they are delivering statutory advocacy services in Ealing and in Hounslow. So they are the provider of these services in your area. The phone number for them is 0300 456 2370. I will follow this up with an email to Toby, who will distribute it to you all. But they are the provider of these statutory advocacy services. And I'm sure some of the clients that you are working with that need advocacy support could be supported through those statutory advocacy services. And by rights, you could be making referrals to them to ensure that your clients are accessing support from professionally qualified advocates. So you are entitled to be referring through to these services. And if someone is eligible under any of these categories, they can get access to a professional advocate. Okay. I was talking to Anna, I think it was Anna, wasn't it, during the break, about the next category of advocacy. The court service can be really confusing if there's a hearing about someone. For a lot of people, whatever their background, it's a very confusing environment to be in. And if a judge who is presiding over a court case that's talking about a vulnerable person, if they feel that that person is not being suitably supported or appropriately supported by their legal representative, their solicitor or their barrister, they can order a paid representative to be appointed by the court to do that advocacy work with that vulnerable person. But it's at the discretion of the judge to decide if someone is being appropriately supported. So there are organisations out there that offer paid representatives to the court system. They go through a scrutiny process. They become approved suppliers of paid representatives, and they will appoint someone to work as an advocate for someone who has got a legal representative, has got a solicitor. Because solicitors maybe don't have the skills of an advocate, a trained advocate, whereas the paid representatives are a trained advocate and can provide that advocacy type support, which we've already spoken about, is not legal advice. It's about that empowerment to understand, to communicate, to get their point across, and so on. So that's one form of advocacy. Self-advocacy is where someone is supported to advocate for themselves, where they are empowered and supported to get their point across, to be heard. Peer advocacy is another form of advocacy, which is sometimes called community advocacy. And it's where people who've got an issue or a challenge or something that they're trying to get help with would actually go to a peer, someone who is in the same position as them or someone who's got experience of it themselves. There are peer support groups within communities where people can get help from their colleagues to find a solution to something that they need help with. Community advocacy and peer advocacy sometimes is part of a statutory advocacy contract, but sometimes it can be started up as a peer support group. And if it's run on the principles of advocacy, as we've just run through, it can provide peer-to-peer advocacy services. So it might be worth doing a bit of research and seeing if there is any peer advocacy being delivered by Power, supported by Power, or if there's maybe a need for this to be set up within the area. So peer advocacy is people with lived experience supporting one another, empowering one another, and together helping find solutions to ensure that their voices are heard. And this kind of taps into what Ian was talking about around campaigning. Peer advocacy groups can sometimes can lobby for change. You know, if there are people with a particular common challenge or issue, they can come together and say, look, this is what we're encountering, and actually this needs to change. So those peer advocacy groups can really drive some policy change or campaigning for working differently. Citizen advocacy is the same thing. It's where you just get people within the community who will support advocacy. They're untrained and they have a rudimentary understanding of advocacy. It could be that it's just part of their job and they come in as a volunteer to do it. So they're not qualified, they're not trained, but they just volunteer to provide advocacy support to others. And sometimes that can be as simple as helping people understand what's written in a grant form, not a grant form, a benefit claim form. It can be helping someone through that. Citizens Advice do a lot of citizen advocacy, but without actually calling it citizen advocacy. It's just they call them volunteers. So citizen advocacy is more common than we think. You've then got specialist children's advocacy, which is providing advocacy support to children. Now, this can be working with very, very, very young children, people that are in young people that are in care, people that are in hospital, and it's actually working. It's a really specialist advocacy working with children and the additional level of challenge that comes with working with vulnerable children, particularly. So there are specialist children's advocacy providers as well. Oops.
Jason, sorry, it's Anna. Can I ask you about this, just about children's advocacy? Because I'm aware that the child can get advocate if they're under care of local authority.
Yeah.
Or I wonder if you're aware of there's anything that exists for children, just for them to have their voice accepted and heard when there are challenges within the families. So most common issue is when there are, parents separated, and sometimes the child is in between the parents, and there are different views from each parent where the child, should live with whom. So I wonder if there's anything like that.
Again, I'm afraid I've got to defer back to the fact that I'm not a qualified advocate, and certainly not a specialist children's advocate. I will find the answer to that and I will send that through.
Thank you.
So I apologise, I can't give you an answer to that. I don't want to fudge an answer. I will speak to a colleague who is a qualified children's advocate, and I will get that answer back to you.
Can you hear me? May I ask a question?
Yes, Ken, yeah.
2 points. The PowerPoint pages, I assume that Ian and Toby will be circulated after the session.
They will, yes.
They will, okay. The next one is, and this of course is for Ian and Toby. Thank you very much for recommending Power, that they're supposed to be working in Ealing. As explained at the beginning of the session, we are creating a PowerPoint we are creating a prototype, and we have been advised that advocacy should be built into it. We made contact with Power. They have got a central telephone number based in the Midlands.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, they were disowning that they have an obligation to do work in Ealing. So Toby and Ian should look into that to see what service Power is providing, or what services Power are in fact entitled to deliver in Ealing before circulating any details.
I definitely will, because like, it's really interesting. That was a complete gap in my knowledge about that organization, and to be honest, I had heard of the name of that group before, but I had no idea what they did. And I definitely will be making contact with them. So yeah, it's been great getting that piece of information from Jason, and yeah, I will definitely look into that, because it's essential. And their profile in Ealing and Hounslow, well, I don't think they've got a profile really, and so I'll be on the case, don't worry.
This is to everyone. I thank you for raising that, Ken. That second point. I will very diplomatically, which is unlike me, when it comes to the commissioning of statutory services, from my experience of bidding, to deliver statutory services, and I'm pointing the finger at no specific organisation. There are some people that will bid and will deliver the bare minimum that they can get away with as part of a contract. And I will stop at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to skip over this slide because we've really spoken about this quite at length, really. These are some of the things of what an advocate does. We've spoken a lot about it. You'll be getting the slides, so read these at your leisure. I'm just aware I've got a limited amount of time to run through representation. So when would you use an advocate? If a person is not understanding relevant information, if they're not understanding what they're being told, if they are struggling to retain that information, if they can't process that, or kind of think, well, actually, they're telling me this, what does that mean for me? If anybody's just not really getting what's happening around them, that would be the time for an advocate to come in. And when would an advocate be used? Sorry, the final point on the top bit is when they can't communicate what they want, or they're unable to communicate what they're thinking. That can be language related, it can be mental capacity related, it could be because of an illness, it could be because of their circumstances, it could be because of their age, multiple factors. So you can see actually there's quite a wide group of people that could really benefit from advocacy support. When does an advocate come in? Well, if there are assessments being made on someone and someone feels that their needs are not being considered during that assessment, care and support planning. If you're sitting there and you've got all these professionals sitting around you saying, well, of course, this is what's needed, and this is what's needed, and this is the best course of action. If someone doesn't feel that they're part of that and they're being considered and their views of it, then an advocate can really help with that, just to ensure that that voice is heard and is part of the process. Benefit claims, tribunals, assessment panels, that kind of thing. It can be really intimidating being part of that. Just having that person beside you who is independent, but ensuring that you are engaged in the process and that you're heard, can be massively beneficial. Appeals processes, again, important. And safeguarding and reviews, again, having an advocate involved in those situations can really help someone be properly connected into those processes. We've spoken about this. What an advocate doesn't do, they don't give advice, they don't speak on someone's behalf, they don't express their own opinions, they don't make decisions on behalf of that client, and they do not undertake limiting behaviour. They do not assume that someone can't do something. They have to be positive, empowering, optimistic, that if they talk to that client in the right way, they can be more involved than even the client may think they can be. So they should not be limiting in the way they support a client. I'll skip over the conclusions because we've reflected quite a lot on those. Right, we've got just over 15 minutes to talk about representation. It's good because it's a lot simpler than advocacy. So apologies that we've taken so long on advocacy, but it's a big subject. So what we mean by representation. Representation is a range of activities that ensure that the voices and opinions of groups are heard in decisions that will affect them. So we are not doing what advocacy does, which is talking about an individual. We are not just conveying what an individual wants to happen to them or to empower an individual to be involved in a decision. This is about groups of people. So you are putting in place actions, activities that will allow multiple voices to be heard. And this really, for me, is the way that I've always done representation work. Again, for the time that I was CEO of Kent Can, we represented the several thousand frontline voluntary sector organisations in Kent and Medway. It was our role. We were given the mandate by them to speak on their behalf at various forums and committees and in different ways, and to lobby for better involvement in commissioning and lobbying and working as expert witnesses in certain judicial reviews and things like that as well. We were there to really be that representative body because we've been given the mandate. We've been created as an organisation by the people that we were there to serve. So we were there in the middle. We were there as that representation body, and essentially what we did was we attended forums. We created forums. We would create mechanisms where people could provide us with crucial information about issues that we felt were appropriate. We worked absolutely on their behalf. We didn't have an axe to grind of our own because we weren't delivering services that other charities were. So we were there to literally be a conduit for all of these charities, not individually, not working with a single charity. We were working there for the group as a mass. And the way that we worked out what we needed to say is listed here on the left-hand side of this slide. So to work out what we needed to say as the representative of the sector, we went out there and we regularly, and every quarter, we would keep our ear to the ground. And if we felt that there was an issue or a theme or a subject or a topic that needed to be explored or needed to be spoken about, we would actually do one of three things. We would put a survey out there, and at the time that I was chief exec, it was when the local authority, Kent County Council, were getting rid of grants to frontline charities, and they said, what we're doing is we're going to amalgamate all those grants together, and it's worth something in the region of, I think it's somewhere in the region of about £8 million a year, those grants. We're going to put it all together and we're going to run it as contracts. We're going to put it out as a contract. Now, us sitting here in the middle as the representation body, we were like, wow, that's got potential to create havoc. That has the potential to really, really, really undermine some of these smaller organisations. So we need to try and find a way to work out what their reaction would be to that. Is our hunch that this isn't going to be popular? Do we just jump into those forums, those things here down the right-hand side, and do we just say, no, it's against it? Or do we actually gather some evidence? So we ran surveys. We would regularly ask people, leaders of voluntary sector organisations, well, how do you feel about this? This is a survey about the loss of grants and it moving into commissioning. You can be contracted to deliver services. How do you feel about that? Because we needed the evidence to be able to actively represent. So what we did was we did a lot of market research, we did a lot of consultation through surveys and polls and things like that around subjects that we were hearing the rumbles on the ground about. Actually, we think this might be an issue. Well, let's ask. And we were there gathering information, looking at it, analysing it, and then passing it on through these different mechanisms that there were on the right-hand side. And I think representation really is about that. You don't just make assumptions about this group that are on the left-hand side. You need to actively be collecting evidence and information, statistics, stories, opinions, ideas from the people that you are there to represent. You need to keep those lines of dialogue open, but to make sure that that input is representative, that you've got diverse opinions within there as well, that you're not just kind of speaking to the same old people. You're not just, oh yeah, this is Tunbridge Wells, so yeah, we'll go and talk to Vaught because they know about Tunbridge Wells. That you really, really proactively reach out and gather information from as broad an audience as possible. So with that commitment to being accessible and gathering a broad range of information, use a variety of methods to get that information. Be out there talking to people, ask the question, put polls out there, surveys. You can do it online through things like Facebook polls. You can put things out on Instagram. There's all sorts of research tools that are free to use, that are cheap to use. SurveyMonkey always used to be free. It's not now. The cheapest really is for 400 quid a year. So there might be free alternatives to SurveyMonkey that you could use. You have to back up what you say as a representation body. You have to back it up with evidence that you've consulted with your group. And the ways to do it, we've got it listed here: surveys and polls, doing some research, some desk research, but also, run forums and networks, run different themed groups so that you can get, those people that you are representing, that you are providing them with an easy and accessible way of communicating what their needs are, what their ideas are, what their thoughts are. Now, there were representation bodies that we would attend meetings alongside who never did any of that stuff on the left-hand side. They never went out and spoke to their members. They very rarely asked opinions. All they would do is talk on behalf of their own organisation. They'd say, well, of course, this is what you need to consider as well. And actually they were funded to represent, but they didn't represent, they represented themselves. So if you are looking at doing any form of representation, you need to do two things. You need to look at the left-hand side, which is create a mechanism for people to easily and accessibly share their thoughts, their ideas, and to provide you with the evidence and the information that you need to relay to these people that are on the right-hand side, or through these channels on the right-hand side. So if you are going to represent, go to forums where the people that you want to influence are going to be. Speak as experts at select committees. So if someone is doing if a local authority is doing a review on something, get there as a representative, but go there armed with statistics, with information, with case studies, with examples. Don't just go there and speak in general terms. Speak specifically based upon the information that you've gathered there from the left-hand side. The third blob down on the right-hand side is market engagement. If the local authority is looking at procuring services, as a representation body, go along and speak on behalf of your members. You are entitled to speak on behalf of them because you've got information from them. You've gathered data that backs up what you're saying. As a representative of a group, try and get on panels, try and get on boards, try and be involved in decision-making panels, because actually that's a really good way of making change. You use what you've been told by your clients, your groups of clients, to influence So you can be more active by being on these things. One of the things we used to do quite a lot was the National Lottery, or the big lottery as it used to be, and now the National Lottery Community Fund. They used to regularly put surveys out and ask us to share our findings. Before we would ever respond to that, we put a little survey together and say, these are the questions being asked. How would you like us to respond? We then had the ability to put general responses back that came from our members. So we needed to speak. We always ask them first. So if you're going to represent anyone, speak to them first. I'm sorry if it's labouring the point, but it's just crucial. And always, always, always look for opportunities to input into policies that are being redrafted, policies that are being implemented, that are being written, policies that are being updated. But again, before you comment on them and before you put anything in, talk to your members, talk to your clients, talk to your groups, use the variety of different methods that you've got available to you so that you are speaking truly on their behalf. So, how are we doing for time? Oh, nearly there. Right. Bad representation is where you do none of that consultation work, where you are speaking on behalf of your organization. You can't prove that you're speaking on behalf of this particular group, your group of interest. Sometimes, and I've had this with some CVSs that I've worked with in the past, where the chief exec, who is the person going along to the forums representing the members, has a particular agenda of their own, and they will keep banging on about these things because it's their own little axe to grind. That's really poor representation. That's really bad representation because they're hijacking their position. Do not hijack the position to labour a point that you personally are interested in. You are there to convey what your members, your community of interest, the group of people that you are there to support, you need to convey what they collectively and democratically are telling you. And the only way to do that is to go out there and, provide an accessible way for them to share with you what you need to say. Yeah, avoid conflicts of interest if you possibly can. Avoid, I had one at Kent Can that our principal funder was the county council, who asked us to go and to represent the sector. We always went armed with information off the back of a survey or off the back of a piece of research that we'd done. Sometimes they would say, yeah, do remember that we fund you. And we would say, I'm sorry, you're funding us to gather this information to present it back to you. So, and they said, well, yeah, when it comes to reviewing funding, we might have to consider that. We just had to be brave with that and say, well, I'm sorry, this is what you're paying us to do, so we're doing it. So you might not like the message, but we're not the originators of the message. We just simply, don't shoot the messenger, really was the thing there. So conflicts can arise, particularly when it comes to funding. Bad representation is also when you're talking without evidence, when you're talking without knowledge. I've seen people just be in situations where they've had to speak on behalf of the sector, and you're clear they've spoken to no one else, and they don't have that level of or depth of knowledge about a particular subject. The only way to get it is to ask the people that are affected by it. And talking with no evidence base. If you have got statistics and you can say 60% of our members say that this service is ineffective for them, and these are some of the changes that they would like to see, you're probably going to get a bit more traction and a bit more, you can more effectively lobby for change, and you can more effectively influence change if you have that evidence base. So again, if we go back to the previous diagram, if you've done that consultation and you've got proof of how you gathered that information, you stand a much better chance of being listened to. So bad representation means that you tend not to get listened to because you've got nothing to really back it up. So, questions. I apologise that we've rattled through representation, but it's quite, in the scheme of things, it's quite a simple subject. It's not It's not massively complicated. Just to summarize it really, the people that you're there to represent, talk to them, ask them, find out what it is that they want you to say, and then say it. Work out who those people are that you need to communicate to. Who are the people that you need to influence? Is it the local authority because there's a particular policy that they're putting in place that has potential to impact positively or negatively on this group? Could it be funders? You're trying to change the way funding is being allocated. Work out what the issues are that will affect this group, and then ask them, how will it affect you? So that you've then got the evidence that you need to then start doing that lobbying and that influencing piece. So representation is not just, it's not just banging the drum. It's just saying you know this is what needs to be done. It's really trying to positively lobby for change and influence and just to get people to do things differently based on evidence that you've gathered. I've got 3 questions I think that have come up on chat. Here are my contact details. I'll just leave them up for the time being before I stop sharing the screen. If anybody has any subsequent questions, anything that they would like clarification on, please do contact me. I'm more than happy to help with it. My email is jason@capenterprise.co.uk. I'm happy to give some free support. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, Toby's reminded me, sorry, I always forget this. There is a SurveyMonkey link. Please do complete that. The funders who paid for this wider training program want feedback. They want to know what's gone well, what hasn't gone well. Please be honest, because actually if there are things that I'm not doing well in the training, I want to know about it because I want to improve. Yes, they're the questions, I think. Has anybody got any other questions? I'm just going to close the screen down so that we can get everybody viewing everyone else. Any questions, thoughts, observations, anything that we need to consider?
No question, just thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason. It was really interesting. It's definitely clarified lots of areas in terms of boundaries and different types of advocacy. So yeah, all I can think is that it's very difficult path to tread doing advocacy. Like I could see, it's so much easier to do advice work, but you have to really work on the long-term perspective and think about working in advocacy about the very long-term effects you can have when you operate like that. So yeah, it was just very interesting. Thank you. I see Anna's got a hand up.
Yes, I'm a very curious person. I just have a question regarding the fact that we not support the community directly anymore. We signpost them to various services, like for example, the East European Resource Center, our main partner for people that I need. But there are other services, and it would be important for us to educate, as I mentioned at the beginning, to educate. So I wonder, maybe it's just for maybe in a future contact with you, I wonder if you would be, if there's any help that you could offer, just maybe brief guidance, how we can help people, the community, to, to understand. We need to put this in writing or like a multimedia, but it has to be in Polish because, many people who are and probably it's other communities are similar. People who struggle the most are those whose English is not good enough for them to use services that are provided in English only. So I wonder, I would be very, very, I would appreciate if there would be any chance to speak to you because, we need to educate community about the even the service, the power in Ealing and other places. There are other services free of charge regarding advocacy, but people, until someone is not understanding the word advocacy and is not aware the help is available, they can't even look for it. So this is the first step for our organization is to explain people the role of advocate and where the help is available, how they can find this kind of help. So we need to first educate.
Yeah, and I think every advocacy provider is painfully aware of the barrier that the term advocacy creates. People just not understanding what it's about. I mean, we've had 3 hours to just get a level of understanding across, and you will probably tomorrow go, actually, I've thought about it a bit. I've got a question around that as well. Advocacy is a complicated subject, and that education piece is really, really hard. If anyone can nail it, it probably will be the Advocacy Project who are doing that. With having worked with a provider of statutory advocacy services, self-referrals into advocacy are really low. And I think one of the reasons for that is people don't understand what it is. Well, what is this advocacy thing? I can understand getting advice, but how can advocacy help me? So there is a big piece of work around that. Yeah, you're more, as I say, the offer is there. More than happy to offer some follow-up support if anybody would like it. I'm sure the language issue, Toby, is not unique in Polish. I'm sure it's probably a common issue. It might be a view that CVS has got some work that has been done in the past or could be done. Potential collaboration there on something.
Yes, we've been working together. Our organization is a member of Ealing CVS, and I attended many courses, and this is helpful. But you know, the work that is needed, it's really big, and I feel like it's important to learn and use the best practice and ideas about educating community rather than just me doing on my own. So I prefer to ask for support, and just if you can share experience in the future, I will contact. And obviously with Ealing CVS, we've been working for 5 years, I think.
Yeah, it's a thorny one. Getting advocacy to sort of communicate, promote itself better, clearly and simply and concisely is tough.
I would like to ask you more question about the advocacy. First of all, I want to know exactly what's the procedure and policy, like when the person who doing advocacy, because the one who doing advice and guidance, you have to have like a gateway assessor training. You have a advice training for 2 years, and you can practice, and also you have somebody who observation. And when you're doing advocacy, and what kind of qualification you must, to put it into place? That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. I'm just going to put in the chat section the link to Kate Mercer's Black Belt Advocacy Training. They are the provider of advocacy training in the UK. So, rather than me risking giving you any duff information, if you go to that website, all of the information that you require will be on there, the qualifications that you would need to go through to. I know that the Advocacy People, the charity that I do a lot of work with, everybody who works in their call centre has a level 1 qualification. Has a level 2 qualification in advocacy. Advocates that are out in the field and that are working one-to-one with clients and supporting people through advocacy cases have a level 3. And then supervising advocates who are providing support to the level 3 advocates have to have level 4. But Kate Mercer and Black Belt Advocacy Training, that they will be able to give you absolute accurate information on that one.
Okay, then. And also, I would like to add this one. Today, the one we take the training, which level that one we can account it?
What, off of today's? Yeah, it's not accredited training. It's unaccredited training, so it's more of sort of awareness. It's a basic level unaccredited training. Yeah, I'm afraid
Yeah,
not.
it's just an overview because we've had to get through so much information, so that's why it's not really accredited. If it was accredited, it would have to take much longer, unfortunately. But I hope you found it useful. I mean, I certainly have. So yeah, well, if there aren't any other questions, all remains to be said is thank you very much, Jason. You've done a series of all these training sessions over the past couple of months. It's been really good. And I'm sure we'll be working with you again in the new year. But for now, thanks very much for all your training sessions. I've had some great feedback on them, and I'm sure I will today. But yeah, please, everyone, if you can just take a second to complete your feedback for me. It's so important. So if you can just take a few minutes to do that. And I will be sending around the video of today, so you can whiz through bits and refresh your memory, or go to whatever areas you want to watch again, and all the links and the slides that Jason's used, be sending those around. So
have I not done it? Sorry, Toby. I was meant to do that before. Sorry. I'll send them through.
Okay.
I'll send through
No
the information about Power and
yeah,
Kate Mercer as well.
yeah, and I'll send that around to everyone.